lovely people. Hello, hello. How are you guys doing? Hope you're doing great. Today's video is going to be about the history of Halloween. Ha ha ha. First of all, the definition of Halloween. A night before All Saints' Day, celebrated on October 31st, where children dress in costumes and go door to door asking for candy. Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat. If you don't, I don't care. I'll pull down your underwear. Halloween's origins date back to the ancient Celtic festival called Samhain. The Celts, who lived 2,000 years ago, mainly in the lands that are now known as Ireland, northern France, and the United Kingdom, all celebrated their new year on November 1st. This day marked the end of summer and the harvest and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was often associated with human death. The Celts believed that on the night before their new year, which would have been October 31st, that the veil between worlds of the dead and the living were thinned. On the night of October 31st, they would celebrate Samhain, a night that was believed that the dead came back to the earth. The Celts believed that in addition to causing damage and trouble and all that stuff, that the otherworldly spirits actually made it easier for the druids or droids, whatever you want to call it, Celtic priests, to make accurate predictions about the future. For the people that were entirely dependent on the volatile natural world, these prophecies and predictions were great comfort to them in the long, dark, cold winter. To commemorate the event, the Celtic priest would build huge bonfires where the Celts would burn crops and animals as sacrifices to the Celtic deities. During this celebration, the Celts wore costumes, mainly consisting of animal heads and skins, and they tried to tell each other their fortunes. When the celebration was over, they relit their hearth fires, which they had extinguished earlier that evening, from the sacred bonfire to help protect them during the coming winter. By AD 43, the Roman Empire had conquered most of the Celtic territory, and in the course of the 400 years, two of the Roman festivals would kind of combine with the Celtic festival of Samhain. The first was Feralia, a day in late October where the Romans would commemorate the passing of the dead. The second was a day to honor Pomona, the goddess of fruit and trees. The symbol of this goddess is the apple, and the incorporation into Samhain is probably what made the tradition of bobbing apples and today's Halloween traditions. On May 13th, AD 609, Pope Boniface IV dedicated the Pantheon in Rome to all Christian martyrs, and the Catholic feast of All Martyrs' Day was established in the Western Church. Pope Gregory III later expanded the festival to include All Saints and All Martyrs, and he later changed the observance from May 13th to November 1st. By the 9th century, the influence of Christianity had spread through the Celtic lands, where it gradually blended with and supplanted older Celtic rites. In AD 1000, the Church made November 2nd All Souls' Day, a day to honor the dead. It's widely believed that the Church was trying to replace the Celtic Festival of the Dead with a related church-sanctioned holiday. All Souls Day was celebrated very similar to Samhain. They had bonfires and parades, and they dressed up in costumes as saints, angels, and devils. The All Saints Day celebration was also called All Hallows or All Hallowmas. And on the night before it, the traditional day of Samhain in the Celtic religion, it began to be called All Hallows Eve and then eventually Halloween. The celebration of Halloween was extremely limited in colonial New England because of the rigid Protestant belief system there. Halloween was much more common in Maryland and the southern colonies. As the belief and customs of many European ethnic groups began to mesh with the American Indians, a very American version of Halloween began to emerge. The first celebration was called play parties, which were public events to celebrate the harvest. Neighbors would tell each other stories of the dead, they would tell each other their fortunes, and they would dance and they would sing. Colonial Halloween also included telling ghost stories and mischief type stories of all kinds. By the middle of the 19th century, autumn festivities were very common, but Halloween was not yet celebrated very commonly throughout the country. By the second half of the 19th century, America was flooded with new immigrants. These new immigrants, especially the millions of Irish immigrants trying to flee the potato famine, really made Halloween popular throughout the nation. Now let's talk about the history of trick-or-treating. Borrowing from the European traditions, the Americans began to dress up in costumes and go door to door asking for food and money. Well, hello, cutie. What can I do for you? My mama said we need beans and $50, bitch. A tradition that now became what we know today as trick-or-treating. Young women believed that on Halloween they could do tricks with yarn, apple parings, or mirrors to get the appearance or name of their future husbands. In the late 1800s, there was a move in America to mold Halloween into more of a community and neighborly-like holiday instead of a holiday relating to ghost, witchcraft, and pranks. At the turn of the century, Halloween parties for children and adults became the most common way to celebrate Halloween. Parties focused on games, seasonal food, and costumes. Parents were encouraged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything grotesque or frightening out of the Halloween celebration. Because of these efforts, Halloween lost a lot of its superstition and religious overtones by the 20th century. Now let's talk about Halloween parties. By the 1920s and 1930s, Halloween became a secular but community-based holiday that focused on parades and parties as a featured entertainment. Despite the best efforts of schools and communities, vandalism became kind of a big thing at this time. By the 1950s, communities had successfully kind of limited vandalism, and Halloween became a holiday focused mainly on the young. During the 1950s baby boom, Halloween parties moved from community civic centers to the classrooms and homes of most children to make it easier and more convenient to have Halloween parties and have fun. Between 1920 and 1950, the centuries-old practice of trick-or-treating was also revived. Trick-or-treating was a relatively inexpensive way for the town and the community to celebrate Halloween. In theory, families could prevent tricks from being played on them by giving the kids treats. Today, Americans spend around $6 billion annually on Halloween, making it the second largest money-making holiday ever. Let's talk a little bit about All Souls Day and soul cakes. The American Halloween tradition of trick-or-treating probably dates back to All Souls Day parade traditions in England. During these festivities, the poor would beg for food, and citizens would give them what was called soul cakes in return for their dead relatives. The distribution of soul cakes was encouraged by the church to replace the ancient traditions of leaving wine and food out for roaming spirits. The practice that was referred to as going a sowing was eventually picked up by children who would go house to house asking for ale, food, and money. The tradition of dressing up for Halloween has both European and Celtic roots. Hundreds of years ago, winter was an uncertain and frightening time. Food supplies often ran low, and for people afraid of the dark, winter was full of, constant worry and just wasn't fun. On Halloween, when it was believed that spirits came back to Earth from the other world, people were really afraid to leave their house in fear that they would encounter these spirits from the spirit world. Hi. Hi. What's wrong? Nothing. You kind of smell different. I shit myself. To avoid being recognized by these spirits, if people had to leave their homes, they would wear masks and costumes to trick the spirits into thinking that they were just, one of them, one of the peeps, one of the guys, spirit guys. And on Halloween, to keep these spirits out of their house, they would put food outside of their doors and windows, bowls of food, to appease these ghosts and make them, stop and have a snack instead of entering their home. Now we're gonna talk about black cats and ghosts. Oh yeah. Halloween has always been a holiday full of mystery, magic, superstition, and just creepiness. It began as a Celtic end of summer festival and celebration where people felt extra close to dead relatives and friends. For these friendly spirits, they would set places at the dinner table, put treats out on the porch and side of the road, and light candles to help the spirits find their way back to the spirit world. Today's Halloween ghosts are depicted as more scary and stuff, and so are the costumes and superstitions and all that stuff of Halloween these days, too. We also avoid crossing paths with black cats, thinking that they will give us bad luck. This idea and superstition came from the Middle Ages when they believed that witches turned into black cats to avoid being detected. We also avoid walking under ladders. We believe that this superstition came from the ancient Egyptians who believed that triangles and stuff like that were really sacred. Now let's talk about Halloween matchmaking and lesser known rituals. Many of these obsolete rituals focused on the future instead of the past and the living instead of the dead. A lot of these rituals and stuff were about helping young women identify their future husband, and with luck, hopefully, they would be married by next Halloween. In 18th century Ireland, a matchmaking cook would bury a ring inside some mashed potatoes on Halloween night, hoping to bring true love to the diner who found it. In Scotland, fortune tellers would tell eligible young ladies to name hazelnuts for each of her suitors and then throw them nuts in the fireplace. The nut that burned to ashes, rather than popping and exploding, represented that lady's future husband. But then there was also other versions of this same practice, where when the nut burnt to ashes, that meant that that was not the girl's lover. No girl, dump his ass. A sugary concoction of walnuts, hazelnuts, and nutmeg was often given to a woman to drink so that on Halloween night she could lay down and sleep and dream of her future lover. However, she was probably just tripping balls. One practice is where ladies would take the peels of apples and throw them over their shoulders in hopes that when they turned around, them peels would be in the shape of their future lover's initials. I would turn around and mine would say, "No, girl, not again. No, no, baby, no. Leave the men's alone. Leave the men's alone." It say all that. One practice, they would try to get a glimpse of their future by looking at like egg yolk in water to see if it like gave them shapes or initials or any idea about what their future would be like. One practice was where women would stand in a dark room in front of a mirror holding a lit candle and look over their shoulder to see their future husbands' faces. But man, no, I would never. That's Bloody Mary. I'm getting out of there. Some practices were more competitive, where the first to find a burr or chestnut would be the next to marry. Like, where do they even get some of this shit at? Like, yeah, go find a chestnut, yeah, and you'll get married next, yeah. Shit gets on my nerves. I could just get her away. Like, what? And then the like best apple bobber would be the next one down the aisle. Like, that was definitely a man's idea. Like, let's watch the women bob for apples, and whoever does it best, oh yeah, I'm marrying her.